Hey everyone, welcome back to the Dairy Raid in episode 2 of our spring football preview series, where, as always, we're taking a look at Wisconsin football from a coach's point of view, talking about how the coaches approach this opportunity to lay the first bricks in the foundation of the 2026 season, to coin a phrase, and how us as fans can learn about this team with the limited access that we are going to have, as always. Last time we talked about the offense and the, dare I say, monumental task the staff has in turning around the disaster that was 2025 with as many as 9 new starters and even more role players. Today we're going to focus on the defense, and starting with the question, will the defense evolution continue? Is this unit going to build off of an improved 2025 while adding a lot of new pieces, potentially exploring new schematic changes, and having to have new leaders step up? It is going to be a big season as well for the defense, and it starts here in the spring because, like I said last time, spring is an opportunity to install everything, see it up close, spend a lot of time focusing on it, and then use the rest of the spring in the office and in the summer learning and reflecting on what we did in the spring to then set the foundation for fall camp. And let's just start kind of right there. Last season, a lot of emphasis in the transfer portal was on fixing the defensive line, the front seven overall, because unfortunately for a team that ran a 2-4-3-4 defense, playing in a conference with a lot of run-first teams, the cupboard was pretty bare these last 2 years, and kind of the upperclassmen leadership at some of those positions, the upperclassmen who should be leading those positions, really couldn't. And so we weren't built to play the system that we have had in the past. And so when we tried to meld the elite and play old school Wisconsin football, we just couldn't do it. Last season, with adding so many players on the front seven, especially interior and on the edges, they took the 3-3 mentality of being multiple and playing with different angles and creating matchup issues to the old school Wisconsin defensive front. Now in 2026, are we going to see the next step in the evolution where the base defense will start to more resemble the defense that Coach Fickle ran at Cincinnati, using Big Ten size and speed at some of those positions to maybe cover up some of the deficiencies that would come from a conference that is bigger, stronger, more physical? And what does this mean for the position groups if this evolution is going to continue? I think the big thing that we can look at here is I think our linebacking core, both our interior and our edges, is pretty set. You can see even with new players come in, you can already kind of picture, the two inside linebacker spots, the star linebacker, and your edges, both your field side edge and your boundary edge. You can kind of see players fitting into those roles. But changing the defensive structure to see more true 3-down fronts is going to rely on defensive linemen who has versatility, inside-out versatility. And while I thought we had that last year, we see with the transfers coming in particular, Junior Poyser, Ham Russell, and Jake Anderson, not to exclude Denigel Cooper, who I think is more of a developmental piece. You have three players who have very different player profiles, but could play a couple different positions in a 2-4 or 3-3, 4 down front. And so what we want to be looking at this spring is when you watch these players running drills, especially any kind of drill where they're going live against each other, what kind of skills are they working on? Are they working on splitting double teams? Are they working on controlling with the inside hand and creating space and leverage to the outside? Or are they just bullying down and occupying space? You can learn a lot about how a person is going to be used by how they're drilling. And if you see some of these bigger defensive line types working on a shoulder and working to set an edge, whether it be interior or outside, then we might be seeing more of our true defensive linemen playing in a 5-tech role. Now, we're not going to have Jake Anderson playing or Charles Perkins playing out on the field side edge. We're going to leave that spot for a linebacker usually. But you could have a 3-4-ish type defensive end playing a 5-tech like a Jake Anderson, who could be a long 3 or a heavy 5 defensive lineman. Charles Perkins, who could play, at UT Martin, he played as a 4-eye or a 4 on the boundary. In our system, he was playing more of a 3 or sometimes as a 1. So as we look at the defensive front working this spring, look at the type of drills that they're running. Look at who they're going up against, and you're going to get a really good indication of where the defensive structure is heading, because we can't do any changes in the linebacking alignment or structure or the secondary if we don't have D linemen who can play positions outside of your traditional 1-tech and 3-tech. You have to have flexibility, because if you're going to play a true 3-down look, you're going to end up in a situation where one of those 3 down is going to be on an edge. And when you put a big body out on an edge, you have to have speed behind it. That he is more of a B2C gap player and not a contain guy. He is a spill or turn back type player and not a person who's going to run his tackle to the sideline and chase things down from the outside. So defensive line, any changes with the defensive structure that we're going to see in 2026 all starts with the defensive front. I like this is maybe my problem as a coach, where I can see I break players down into very specific roles. I like to use a lot of different players, and so maybe my enthusiasm to find very defined roles for everybody on offense and defense is leading me down a rabbit hole of a lot of changes and a lot of adjustments that can be made. Maybe they are just going to focus on being simple, getting the system down, working on fundamentals, and then growing from there. I hope it's a little bit of both, because it's boring just to be thinking about and watching tackling drills, etc. I want to see schematic changes, and because I think we finally have a defensive roster where I can imagine everything from a 1-5 psycho front to a heavy 5-3 goal line front, and I can fill in players. And this spring, it's going to be real interesting to see how much they're trying to install and what that means for the players behind them going forward. Because, like I said just a second ago, you can't make any structural changes in the secondary or in the linebacking core if you don't have the D lineman to do it. All right, moving on to the linebackers. And like I said before, your two inside linebackers are set. And I think the depth behind them is pretty set. With Cooper Catalano and Mason Posa, you're going to see Schaefer, the junior college transfer, getting into that rotation, and then probably Landon Gauthier as well as a reserve inside linebacker. But when you think about defensive structure, really, with whether you're 3-3 or 2-4 or 2-5, every one of those linebacker positions is different, even if they are structurally similar. So with a logjam in the redshirt sophomore class, how are we going to try to get more of these linebackers on the field, the true linebackers? And that's just going to come with, one, using more of the star package where we get an outside linebacker out of the box and playing in space. And I think we have athletes like Thomas Heiberger or John Kamara who could take the role that we saw Aaron Witt playing as a pseudo. I mean, he was really an edge player playing out in space and acting as a pivot point for the defenders behind him, which is fine. But if you can have a linebacker who can play in space, get downhill, and set the force, or can squeeze and fill, that changes what you can do on the back end. It limits some vulnerability potentially in coverage where you can rely on that linebacker in run support where the back half of the defense can focus up more on playing off the ball, or at least get us in a situation where we can get more size on the field, which obviously in the Big Ten we are going to need. So what we want to look at this spring is who, when we're watching drills, what kind of space is around them? Are we seeing players running more drills where they're block shedding and they are engaging offensive players? Or are they working in space? Are they working on coverage and footwork? That will really give you an indication, especially, again, guys outside of Mason Posa and Cooper Catalano, where we see these players fitting in. I mean, I really think we can run 3-3 personnel and be successful. I think we can run 2-4 personnel and give a 3-3-ish look and be successful because we have the athletes to do it. Athletes are one thing, football players is another. That's something we need to be able to focus on. And so is the staff going to continue to redefine the linebacker responsibilities and specialize, or are we going to have players who have to show versatility if they're going to get on the field? Because if you can set those same four linebackers out there at all times, but put them in different spots where you can drop a Sebastian Cheeks out or bring a John Kamara or a Thomas Heiberger up, and then you can have your field side inside linebacker, your boundary side Mike linebacker, and play underneath. There's so many permutations that you can do with four guys if you have guys who can be versatile. If we're not versatile, what kind of rotation are we going to get similar to where we were last year with the defensive line, where we have very specialized roles? These are questions that should be stimulating for the coaching staff and is going to give newly promoted inside linebacker coach Tuff Borland, Matt Mitchell, Nichols coach Chris Worley, and safety coach Jack Cooper. A lot of work together, and potential for a lot of growth from that group here this spring. And I just want to see those guys get out and hit people. That's another thing I hope we see in our limited access that we get this spring is we see and we hear somebody's going out there making big plays with hits and being all over the field. It's refreshing that we got it from the two inside backers. Let's hope that the remainder of the linebacking core can get that same passion and that same knack for finding the football, because if we do, this could be a special group, even though there's a lot of new faces that we have to learn about. All right, so let's get on and talk about the secondary. And this might take us a little while because there is a lot to talk about with the secondary and all the changes that have happened this offseason and what that means for the group. And then again, how we can identify growth and change when we watch and read about what this group is doing. So the new secondary, first thing starts with our coaching staff, with only Coach Cooper in the same role that he was in last year. Paul Haynes is taking over the overall defensive back coach role. I'm guessing that's similar to a defensive passing game coordinator, with Robert Steeples coming in to coach the corners. And as previously mentioned, Badger staff member, off the field staff member Chris Worley, who is a former linebacker at Ohio State, moving into the nickel role that Scott Powers had last year as he moves on to be the head coach at Central Washington. You just have a new unit, and I really like the idea that they moved Paul Haynes into kind of an overall defensive back role for two reasons. One, you either get his personality and his coaching style or you don't. And a lot of young corners have had problems with his coaching style, with his very old school, very demanding coaching style. Some kids thrive on it. A lot of kids put their guards up when they get that. But Paul Haynes is a good coach. Paul Haynes knows how to coach the position. So now we put him in a position where he is coaching the coaches. And all of a sudden, you get the benefit of his knowledge, and then you get the personal skills. And we're already seeing it of a Robert Steeples taking over the cornerback room. You get the best of both worlds. And that is something that we could benefit from. And then also, too, when we're talking about defensive secondary structure, having somebody who is just overall in charge, looking at the defensive backfield as a whole, it's very important that you have someone in that role, because it just centralizes everything. Everyone's going to have their own opinion. Everyone's going to have their own viewpoint. But if you have that one guy overall who's in charge, he can take that and distribute how he feels, and he can work on the structure how he feels and take as much input as he wants. That is a huge step. And it also is not a bad thing to have an extra coach in the secondary when we, again, have so many new players and we're losing so many of our reps from last season. that need to be filled both by younger players, but especially by the 5 transfers, 6 transfers that have come in. And the secondary, it has to take a next step forward. I think we were pretty solid. I think particularly on the boundary side, short side of the field. Rico unfortunately has kind of regressed from his first year as a starter under Luke Fickell, and I hope and you can see that they're learning from his mistakes, maybe changing the body type, and then more importantly, changing the outlook of that field side corner, where I can see at least 2 of the transfers with Robinson and Fletcher probably being those, field side and can play in man, but can also play over the top and break downhill, so we can still stay in that cover 6 slash palms slash rotating cover 3 shell that we've had and grow from it. But it's been such an influx of talent in the cornerback position. I mean, if we look at what we lost in Rico and Emilio Agard, so blank right there, and you bring in Javon Robinson, Eric Fletcher, Bryce West, and Kai Bates, all the type of players that we would have no business getting in the recruiting cycle. The fact that we were able to attract them to play at Wisconsin, and then guys like West and Bates have multiple years of eligibility. That it's a great way to set the foundation and show it how it's done. You put Javon Robinson out there and say, okay, let's model our play on the field side after a guy like this. And that can really start the ball rolling going forward. Now, another interesting thing about those 4 guys is we've heard, Robinson and Fletcher, obviously in the cornerback discussion, but people have assumed that Bryce West, since he was in line to potentially be the starter at nickel for Ohio State this year, he could be a nickel. We've heard people talk about Kai Bates playing free safety to fill in holes that we've had, but all 4 of those guys were recruited to play corner. And we've got older guys and we have younger guys. So this changes potentially our outlook at nickel. And I think where we've got 2 ways that we can look at the nickel position. If we want to keep our eyes in the defensive back row, you got guys like Jamar Washington and Jameer Scott who have the size and the physicality and the knack for the ball, both in coverage and in run support, that you could groom those 2 guys to be your nickels. And then they have the flexibility to move and drop out in coverage, not only in the flat, but running up the seam, hook curl, whatever. Or, like I have said many times so far this offseason, we could be seeing more of a linebacker playing in that particular spot. So it really depends on what the outlook is. But again, we're talking about 6 different cornerbacks there playing 3 spots, the 2 corner spots and the nickel spot. It allows you to disguise a lot of coverage. We hear talk that they want to run more man coverage, but when you're running man coverage, it just comes down to who's the better athlete, and so often than not, our guys aren't the best athletes, because the best athletes at defensive back positions go play at Ohio State and Alabama and Texas, etc. And we get lucky on developmental pieces. So we've got a scheme coverage, and you can disguise a lot of coverage looks, and you can disguise a lot of pressures. You can show simulated pressure, creeper blitzes, that can create chaos, especially when you're getting teams that are moving their reads for the quarterback position from pure progression to more NFL style reads where we're reading coverage and alignment and leverage more than we're just reading who's open and who's not. In situations like that, you need more zone coverage, more disguised zone coverages, because straight man coverage in a situation where a quarterback is reading defensive backs, you're accelerating his decision making. What we want to be able to do is we want to decelerate his decision making or add an extra step to his decision making. And with this influx of talent in the cornerback room, I think we can do it. Then we go on to the safeties. And of course, this spring, the big question is going to be who's going to be the field side free safety and who's going to be the boundary safety. And how do they look at those positions? Because if you're going to play more man coverage, then your free safety has to be more of a center fielder, play down the middle, and work sideline to sideline type guy. If you're going to play more zone, then he is either a half field or a quarter field or middle field in a three deep look kind of safety. It really changes how the field side safety is being played, and that will change how or who that person is going to be. I think if we look at the room right now, I would put money on Matt Young being the boundary safety, because although I think he grew a lot last season playing free safety in place of Preston Zachman when he was injured, I think he showed incredible range for a guy as big as he is. We have to remember, he is 6'3", 235. He is a off-season strength and conditioning program away from being a NFL linebacker size, playing safety. And he did, I think, a solid job, especially moving up from D3 to the NFL. It's like a true freshman coming in and playing as a true freshman. It's a big step up, and I think he did fine. But at what he does well, which is playing from top down, getting downhill, and tackling. Again, he didn't get a lot of playing time until about the third or fourth game of the season. He still ended up as the number 3 tackler on the team. And so if you play him on the boundary where he's playing over the top of a cover 2 corner, he's rotating down into the hook to curl and buzz coverages, and then he's allowed to get downhill in the run fit, he could be the guy that Austin Brown should have been. And really solidifying the back half of the defense. And then somebody like Marvin Burks, who is looking for more of a versatile role than being the middle of the field safety. You could have a guy who can play from the middle out and can rotate down in buzz coverages, can be aggressive in the run fit, and be in a position to set the force and be an alley player. If he can clean up some of his over aggressiveness, he has the athletic ability to play all over the field. And then if we limit that space so he can be more aggressive by being a quarter field, half field, third field player, you can maximize his ability. We've obviously got the 2 young guys in Dean and Emmerich who are going to force their way into playing time sooner rather than later. They're both young. I would be shocked if they are not in position to be your starters next season, or your first guys off the bench, kind of like Posa and Catalano were last year, and you give those guys an opportunity They're not going to leave the field. And then you got Carson Van Dinter, who is really athletic for a strong safety type. So does he get into the nickel rotation to get a little bit more thump? Who knows? A lot of different things that could happen in the secondary with the safeties and, as I said before, with the corners. So again, when we as fans are looking at the practice reports and we are watching the wired videos and the Twitter clips of what's happening, how can we learn about what's happening in the secondary? Easiest thing to learn about what we're looking at in coverage is what the direction are those corners' hips turning? Are they turning into the football or are they turning out to the man? If the corner's turning in, we call it a zone turn. If he turns to the man, obviously it's a man turn. And it's an easy indicator right there. Some teams try to disguise things and they play match coverage where it's kind of a mix between the two. But on a decent percentage basis, you see those hips turn inside, it's a zone turn. You see the hips turn outside, it's a man turn. On top of that, we're looking at eye discipline and how smoothly and how still our defensive backs' heads are when they are in coverage. I mean, are they swinging back and forth, looking all over the place, or is their head independent of their body and just slowly turning slower than their hips so they can track the ball longer? That kind of eye discipline shows up on film. And when you hear about guys tracking from one side of the field to the other in coverage, you have to have that kind of eye discipline. And then last thing is you watch these guys when they are in coverage and in their initial alignment. Are they coming out of it in a shuffle or are they coming out of it more in a back pedal? If we see more of a shuffle, that's usually an indication that he is looking to come downhill. And if it's a back pedal, you usually end up getting more of a man coverage or you get at least a deeper zone. So little things like that can teach us a lot about defensive back play and can give us at least indicators of how the defensive backs are going to be used in the overall defensive structure. All right, and then finally, let's wrap it up, and we're going to be a lot shorter today on the defense than yesterday. Apologize if I was rambling a little bit in the offensive video. And the last thing I want to talk about is just the vibe of the defense and how especially when we watch like the wired videos and you get a little bit more personable with the players, how relaxed the defense is. That is always a really good indication of how strongly they know the system and how strong they know the scheme and how confident they are in their interactions with the coaches. You hear a lot of "I got you, coach," and a bit more playful attitude. To me, as a coach, is an indicator of a guy who knows what he's doing, or at least can act like he does. It takes a good coach to figure out the difference between someone who's acting, someone who actually knows what they're doing. Confidence goes a long way. And when you take a confident player and you put him in a position, you give him a lot of responsibilities, that's where leaders are developed. And we have lost a lot of our leaders from last season due to graduation or transfer. Christian Allegro and Rico, Preston Zachman, Mason Reiger. I mean, we saw last spring how he immediately became a leader, even though he was a 1-year rental. He became a true Wisconsin football player. And now we had a lot of young guys who could lead by example with your, again, linebacker. Are they going to step up and be those vocal leaders? I think we already know the answer to that. But then, who's going to become the leader on the defensive line? No Ben Barton to lead that room. Is Charles Perkins going to take the step and become the man of that room? Has he done enough growing this offseason to do so? Or are we going to have to rely on a transfer like a veteran like Jake Anderson to lead that room? And then secondary wise, I mean, we're already hearing it with guys like Javon Robinson and Marvin Burks leading the back half of the defense. But as a team that's continuing to grow, as a team that's continuing to move forward, you need people beyond the coaching staff that are going to tell you that things are going to be okay, that are going to pick you up when you're down, because there's going to be times when the coaching staff just has to get to work and just has to be the hard asses. You need the leaders on the team that can fill in the gaps. And this spring, again, really easy thing to watch out for when you're watching clips is defensive backs who get down and are hooping and hollering with the D lineman when they make a big play. Defensive linemen who are chasing things down from behind and showing those kind of effort. That's going to really show, the mental growth of our defense and hopefully lead into real leadership, because we need it. Because that is what is going to keep this team together when things go wrong, and that's what's going to keep the team going up when things go right. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the defense can do this spring. We did a lot of good work last year despite being a 4-8 team, and there's room for this to be a very special defense this year if players put in the work, and it starts here in the spring. All right. So with that being said, I think we are going to call it for today. Again, a lot of questions on the defense, but I think there are a lot of answers already. We just got to go out there and look for them. So next time, tomorrow, we're going to kind of take stock of what we went through in the offense and the defense and look at the big picture of the direction of the program and what this spring means to a very pivotal season coming up in 2026, and where we're going to stand once we get out of these practices and what direction we're going to go from there. So, as always, thank you for listening or watching. We'll see you next time.